Hey, what's happening? I'm Ross. And according to this study by Lending Club, a staggering 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Well, let's get into the article and the underlying survey. Unrelenting inflation is taking a toll, leaving more Americans living paycheck to paycheck. With persistent inflation weighing on consumers, the number of Americans living paycheck to paycheck is increasing, according to a recent report. The rise has been the sharpest for higher earners, the report found. Almost everyone has felt the sting of rising prices. As of August, 60% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck, according to a recent Lending Club report, a number that hasn't budged much since inflation hit 40-year highs. A year ago, the number of adults who felt stretched too thin was closer to 55%. So, I want to go to the actual Lending Club report, and it says here 3 in 5 Americans, that's 60%, live paycheck to paycheck. More people are living paycheck to paycheck but making ends meet than not living paycheck to paycheck. So, America's leading digital marketplace bank today released findings from a 14th edition reality check, paycheck to paycheck. So, apparently, they do this every year, and this is the 14th one. With inflation reaching 40-year high in June, nearly all consumers report noticeable increases in cost of everyday purchases. The Inflation Edition examines the financial lifestyle of U.S. consumers who live paycheck to paycheck, explores how inflation impacts their spending, and details saving decisions on how rising prices impact their financial lifestyle. So, number one, hopefully you're not living paycheck to paycheck. Um, it's not a good place to be. Like, try to set aside some money. You should be trying to get to at least 3 to 6 months living expenses. You need to have an emergency fund. Um, and that may sound far fetched to some people, but living paycheck to paycheck is not a good way to live. It's very stressful, very dangerous. You're always living on the edge. You don't have time to strategize and make your life any better if you're always worried about just paying for your next meal or your next bill or whatever the case is. So it's not a good deal to live paycheck to paycheck. And according to this survey, 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. That is a vast majority. Today's paycheck to paycheck landscape. The research places paycheck to paycheck consumers in two categories: those who can pay their monthly bills without difficulty and those who struggle to do so. I mean, so if you can pay your monthly bills without difficulty, why are you living paycheck to paycheck? That to me just seems like there's a lack of a plan or lack of a structure or something. In August 2022, 41% of consumers were living paycheck to paycheck without difficulty paying their monthly bills, a 10 percentage point increase from September 2021, and exceeds the 40% of consumers who do not live paycheck to paycheck. So 40% of consumers do not live paycheck to paycheck. I'm assuming that means they have some money stashed away somewhere. They have some type of savings, or they have something to fall back on. So I'm assuming that's 40% of consumers. Doesn't say the population, but consumers. 41% of consumers were living paycheck to paycheck without difficulty paying their monthly bills. So again, to me, that begs the question: if you don't have difficulty paying your monthly bills, shouldn't you have a little bit, at least something left over at the end of the month to save? More consumers living paycheck to paycheck indicates that many are continuing to lose their financial stability, says Anuj Nair, Lending Club's financial health officer. Yet the share of consumers living paycheck to paycheck with issues paying their bills has dropped 7 percentage points in the past year. Many have moved to what now may constitute a stable lifestyle, living paycheck to paycheck but still managing to pay your monthly bills. There is just nothing left over at the end. Okay, so I guess that's a little bit of my explanation. Then they're living paycheck to paycheck, but there's nothing left over at the end. Well, I mean, it could be one of two things: either you're spending too much or you're not making enough, right? That's really what it comes down to. In August 2022, 3 in 5 consumers were living paycheck to paycheck. That's 60%. And close to 1/5 struggled to pay their bills. That's 20%. The share of consumers living paycheck to paycheck has trended upward over time, increasing from 57% in September of 2021, and the rise has been strongest across high-income consumers. In August 2022, 45% of those earning more than $100,000 per year were living paycheck to paycheck, a 7 percentage point increase from 38% in September 2021. Okay, so I mean, how? Okay, so maybe it depends on where you're at, where you're living at. I get it. $100,000 in New York City, $100,000 in Boston, $100,000 in San Francisco, San Jose, Miami is not the same as $100,000 in St. Louis, in Kansas City, in Cleveland, right? So there is that. You know, I guess I'm hoping that these people making $100,000 who are living paycheck to paycheck are living on some of these coastal cities where it's extremely expensive to live, because that just doesn't make sense to me that you can be making $100,000 and you're living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, okay, again, if you're in one of these outrageous coastal cities, okay, but if you're in the Midwest, anywhere in the middle of the country, the central of the country, like $100,000, you should be able to um, live okay and put some money away. You should not be living paycheck to paycheck at $100,000. I don't. Wow, up 38%. Where were we at? The point increase from 38% in September 21. 62% of consumers annually earning between $50 and $100,000 were living paycheck to paycheck, up from 57% in September 2021. I mean, I even think $50,000 is an awful lot to make and not have anything saved or set aside, and you're living paycheck to paycheck. Again, $50,000 in Denver is not the same as $50,000 in Boston. So I get that, but I wonder where geographically where the dispersion of this survey was at. Where were these people at? So I know a lot of times the media likes to focus on these big, high cost of living cities. So consumers in the lowest range of the upper income brackets are particularly likely to be sliding towards paycheck to paycheck life. 54% of consumers who annually make between $100,000 and $150,000, more than double the median personal income in the U.S., are living paycheck to paycheck, an increase of 7 percentage points from July 2022. That's just, I just think you're not utilizing your resources very well if you're making $100,000 to $150,000 and you're living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, and in that instance, if you're on the $150,000 side of things, I didn't care where you live at in the country. You should not be living paycheck to paycheck. Um, and you definitely, if you're living anywhere outside of any of these coastal cities and you're making $100K a year and you're living paycheck to paycheck, you got to stop and take a look in the mirror. Figure out what's going on. Where is your money going? Do you have a budget? First things first, stop for 30 days, 90 days. Write down every single thing you spend, every cent you spend. Write it down, get a notebook, put it in an app, something. Because your money is flowing through your hands like water. Where is all your money going? How the heck do 54% of consumers who annually make between $100,000 and $150,000, more than double the median personal income in the U.S., live paycheck to paycheck? I I mean, I have a hard time having sympathy for somebody that makes $150,000 a year, and you know, I just don't understand how that works out. I don't, I don't understand how that works out. How inflation impacts consumers. With inflation reaching a 40-year high in June, nearly all consumers cited noticeable increases in the cost of everyday purchases. Fuel and groceries were cited as most considerable price increases. Yeah, I could see that. Gas prices explain most of the consumer price index increases, and consumers felt the impact across multiple categories, including utilities and groceries. The report finds that 92% of all consumers who purchased products in the last 30 days noticed higher prices in the products they purchased, while 74% of those whose household paid a recurring bill in the last 30 days noted bill increases compared to a year ago. 83% of consumers cited very or extremely considerable increases in fuel prices, and 69% said the same about grocery purchases. Yeah, groceries been off the chains lately. Man, it's getting crazy out there. Additionally, more than 70% of consumers reported increases in utility bills. Yep, here, I concur. With 47% considering these hikes very or extremely significant. The next highest increases in consumers' reports include public transportation, 45%, education, 41%, and personal services, 40%. I don't know what personal services are. Yeah, things are getting more expensive, a lot more expensive everywhere. But I still think $100,000 to $150,000 a year, that's just a lot of money for someone to be making, and they're living paycheck to paycheck, right? You should be able to absorb some of the increased costs and still put money away. I think probably you need to reduce your lifestyle. If you're at 100 grand a year, 100K a year, and you can't find any money to put away, you're probably living a little bit large. You need to cut back. Similar shares of paycheck to paycheck consumers reported higher prices in both products and services, yet those with issues paying their monthly bills were more likely to notice. No caca, no dookie, no poo-poo. Payments, I guess that's this company, data finds that 59% of paycheck to paycheck consumers with issues paying their monthly bills noted that utilities and public transportation saw very or extremely considerable price increases, while consumers living paycheck to paycheck without difficulty paying their monthly bills were less likely to note that utilities, 47%, and public transportation, 44%, had very or extremely considerable price increases. That's common sense. I mean, it's going to affect the people that are living, that make less. All of the inflation affects people that make less. So, payments data also finds that financial lifestyle can determine what paycheck to paycheck consumers consider essential, while responses from consumers of all financial lifestyles indicated that groceries were essential. I agree with that. Groceries are essential. There were notable differences for other expenses. For example, paycheck to paycheck consumers with issues paying their monthly bills were less likely to purchase fuel for a car or pay their utility bill than paycheck to paycheck consumers without difficulty paying their monthly bills and consumers that do not live paycheck to paycheck. Okay, so the people that are having issues paying their monthly bills were less likely to purchase fuel for a car or pay their utility bill. Okay, yeah, the people that are broke are having to make decisions, and yeah, fuel for a car, if you're having to choose between that and food, you're going to choose food. And I'm not talking noise about the study. I'm just, now obviously they're pointing out what the study found. I'm just saying it makes sense. It seems quite obvious to me. Managing everyday expenses. Payment research finds that 60% of all consumers who notice price increases report having to make changes to how they manage and spend money, with half of these consumers and 51% of those under financial stress saying they have made very or extremely significant changes. Consequently, most consumers report changes in their shopping preferences and less spending capacity. The reduction in purchase power is changing consumers' purchasing behaviors and everything from merchant choice to transportation habits. See, this is par for the course. I know that nobody wants to admit we're in a recession right now, although we are in a recession. But people are going to stop spending as the Fed raises interest rates, as things get tougher. This is one survey that's saying, and I came here to talk about people living paycheck to paycheck, but you're going to see this trickle through the economy where this is why I think we're headed for a recession. People don't have the money. Food is up, fuel is up, so they're starting to have to make those choices. So things that are of like entertainment value, luxury things for The middle class and lower middle class, those things are going to start going away, right? I think that, services like Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, these things that are that are, you know, they're a luxury. They're not necessary. They're going to start getting cut. They're going to start getting axed, right? It's just like this survey says. People are starting to change their behavior. Um, 1/4 of consumers who change how they manage and spend money due to inflation report that this has forced them to be more money smart, while 20% say they are shopping at different merchants due to money constraints. The data also shows that most consumers cite limiting spending capacity and changing shopping preferences as the top ways inflation has caused them to change how they manage and spend their money. When consumers choose to spend, they are utilizing credit products like credit cards to fund their lives, and most have not noticed changes to the interest rate of credit products, even though they are increasingly using credit while tightening budgets. For example, nearly a quarter of paycheck to paycheck consumers are unaware of the rates they're paying for financing. Oh, well, this is you're playing with danger. You're playing with fire right now. I mean, so we're using more credit even though interest rates are up. If you have a credit card, you need to pay that thing off as quickly as possible. Interest rates are going nowhere but up, right? They're talking about inflation here, and one of the byproducts of inflation is the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates, right? So if you have a credit card, your interest rates will be going up. Any type of adjustable rate interest you have, whether that's an adjustable rate mortgage, a credit card, anything that's not a fixed interest rate, is going to go up. So if you got credit cards, you need to try to pay those things off as quickly as possible. Um, this is playing with fire. If you're using your credit cards, you're already struggling to make ends meet, and then you're using your credit cards to close the gap. That's can end up in financial ruin. So that's not a good idea. This does not bode well for those consumers that are doing that. It's no secret that prices have been increasing for everyday Americans, not only in goods and services they purchase, but also in the interest rates they're paying to fund their lives. Continue, Nayar. Well, that's a problem. You shouldn't be having to pay interest. You shouldn't be borrowing to fund your life, right? If you're borrowing to fund your life, you have a very fundamental problem. You're either spending too much or you're not making enough, or maybe both. But that's not a good situation to be in. Not a good predicament to be in. While Americans are modifying their spending in light of inflation, there is still a disconnect, with many not seeing the true cost of credit products. This can have detrimental consequences for someone who pays the minimum amount on their credit cards every month. That is a mistake. You should not be carrying over balances on your credit card at all. These are some of the worst credit rates, worst interest rates of any type of loan instrument. Not good at all. Advising consumers to simply cut back on spending to stay on budget and only spend on essentials is no longer helpful financial advice. Why not? Why is that no longer helpful financial advice? Essentials means something different for everyone. Okay, well, okay, that's why it's no longer. Essential means something. How about essential meaning food, clothing, safety, things that you actually need to survive, and everything else is a luxury? Can you survive without this item? Then do you really need it? Consumer outlook on inflation by region. Inflation has no equal impact on rural and urban has an equal impact on rural and urban consumers, with nearly all consumers citing noticeable increases in their everyday expenses. Fuel and groceries were cited most for having sizable product price increases, with rural consumers more likely to report increases than urban dwellers. Although generally similar, shares of rural and urban consumer reports higher prices in both products and service. Rural consumers are slightly more likely to do so, while 93% of rural and 92% of urban consumers notice higher prices in the products they purchased. 70% of rural and 74% of urban consumers saw increases in their monthly bills. So basically everybody saw increases in everything. More than 1/3 of rural consumers have significantly changed how they manage to spend their money, while just 1/4 of urban consumers have done so. Urban consumers are more likely to limit their spending and shift their shopping preferences than rural consumers, however. It's probably because urban consumers has more options, being that they're closer to the city or closer to more options. And rural, they probably have not that many stores, so they're probably going to the closest store. Regardless of where they live, consumers are well aware that living costs, especially fuel, groceries, and utilities, have been on the rise, making it increasingly difficult to make ends meet. Consequently, consumers of all income brackets are adjusting how they manage their spending, with many prioritizing their essential products. Well, yeah, but they said it themselves. How do you define what essential is? Um, I know this. If you're borrowing to fund your life, you're in big trouble. You are in big trouble. So you've got to do something. It's not going to get any better. You've got to do something to change now. You've got to change like yesterday. You cannot be borrowing money, especially with interest rates just going up and up and up. You're going to be spending more. It's already a bad decision to borrow money to fund your just everyday living, right? That already tells me, and it should tell you, that you're in financial dire straits, right? You've got to cut back on your spending right away. And depending on how much you make, maybe it's just your spending, but it could be your income as well. You've got to find a way to get your income up. But one thing's for certain, you cannot go forward borrowing on credit cards if at all. You should not be paying interest. Interest paid on a credit card is all voluntary. I utilize credit cards myself, but they're always paid off at the end of every month. So I never pay interest on a credit card. Interest on a credit card is voluntary. Pay that thing off. Use the credit cards for the convenience and pay them off. If you're carrying over a balance every month and you're funding your life, then you've got a big problem and you really need a wake-up call. Once again, my name is Ross. Hey, if you got any value out of this video, please leave a like. Consider subscribing. It doesn't cost you anything, but it'll help me out greatly. Thank you. Peace.